Hi there. This week I'm going to be talking about public law as well as what we've learned these last couple of weeks. So, first off, what are the administrative agencies? Administrative agencies are created by Congress through enabling legislation. And that enabling act creates the agency, it defines its structure, it gives it power, and also sets its limits. So, what we've learned about agencies are that they're basically kind of like the fourth branch. Why is that? Because they basically have one third of the power from every other branch. For example, they make rules, just like the legislative functions. They enforce rules, like the executive function, and they adjudicate disputes, just like the judicial function. So they have a little bit of everything, which makes them kind of like a fourth branch. It gives it power that maybe the executive function doesn't have in the way agencies do, because they can make their own regulations, which basically have the authority of statute, which makes them laws that we have to follow. People don't really realize how much power they can have to our everyday life. For example, one of the things we learned was that in apples, there can be a certain amount of worms that can be allowed. In coffee, there can be a certain amount of cockroaches that can be allowed, and I'm sure some people have heard of that. I hadn't before, and I was really taken aback because what you can do if you find three cockroach legs, is file grievances, which would take you to a court of adjudication, which would mean you'd have to fire a multi-billion-dollar corporation with tens, maybe even thousands of lawyers when you can barely afford one, which gives them a lot of power over people and their basic rights. And courts rarely tend to disagree with agencies, which give them even more powers. So companies like Apple, let's go to them. They require arbitration, and they can go to a private arbitrator and not a federal judge if your phone blows up, for example. And they can say, well, you agreed to the terms and conditions that you never really read, which gives them a lot of power. Anyway, moving on, I will talk about the delegation of legislative power, which under Article 1, Congress has a legislative power, and it can delegate rulemaking if it provides an overall policy and an intelligent principle, which is called the non-delegation doctrine. In practice, courts always uphold delegations, but delegations are struck down only if Congress gives unlimited or standardless power, which, in my opinion, is kind of blurry. I don't really know what that means, because I feel like they do tend to give them a lot of power that maybe they shouldn't have, especially since the courts don't even tend to disagree with them. So next up, I'm going to be talking about the presidential control and independent agencies. So executive agencies, the heads can be removed by the president at will. If he wants to, he can just fire them. But independent agencies, they can only remove for cause, and they're often multi-membered commissions. They tend to have many people that the president can just fire, but he can tamper with the budget. Basically, as we learned, he can just say we have budget of $1, and you can stop publishing new rules for them as well, which would affect it in huge ways and possibly shut it down. So, the several and agency interpretation. Agency interprets statute. Under the several doctrine, historically, if Congress has delegated authority and the statute is ambiguous and people interpret it in ways that they maybe shouldn't, then the courts can defer to the agency's reasonable interpretations. This gives agencies a lot of power. And then we have APA. Really quick, APA regulates how agencies exercise power and the two rulemaking types. The formal one, which is required when statute mandates trial-like procedures, and the informal one, which is the most common one, which needs public notice, opportunity for comment, and explanation of final rule. And that is the video for this week. I hope you guys learned as much as I did, and I'll see you next week.